It is my proud privilege to welcome you all to the very first event of NEISA, the Northeast India Sociological Association. We are aware that NEISA is a nascent body of sociologists from Northeast India and those working in Northeast India. Although nascent, the association is growing rapidly in terms of the number of members joining it. Some like-minded sociologists gathered in the month of December and discussed and debated about formation of a forum for sociologists working in the region and from the region. And after such discussion, we formed a WhatsApp group. From initial around 10-12 members, the members in the WhatsApp group has risen to more than 200 today. We are in the process of registering the association very soon, and hopefully the association would, the kind of objectives that it has, it would be able to fulfill the much needed support, much needed platform that sociologists in the region are looking for. Evidently, as I have mentioned, the association has come into existence to work for the growth and popularization of sociology in general and in Northeast India, and to promote sociological study of various issues and concerns in the region. One important way in which this objective is sought to be achieved is through organization of annual conferences, organization of lecture series, seminars, etc. It is indeed a great occasion for us that a sociologist of Professor T.K. Oommen's stature is going to launch the activities of NEISA by delivering the inaugural lecture on the theme Exclusion and Inclusion of the Northeast region. I'm sure his deliberation today would provide new insight on the much discussed and debated theme. On behalf of NEISA, I extend my warm welcome to you all. Now I hand over the proceedings to the chair, Professor Tiplut Nongbi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chandan, for this brief introduction and welcome, and also introducing the audience to the formation of NEISA, one of the youngest, I think, professional associations that's coming up in the country. And we do hope that it really takes off and works well, so that we can have, a really constructive research and understanding of the region. I would like to thank Professor T.K. Oommen, who has very agreed to come and present this lecture here this morning. We have an inaugural lecture of NEISA to be lectured by no less a person as such of Professor T.K. Oommen, a person who's really distinguished in his field. It's a great honor to us. And I also personally feel deeply honored because of the fact that Professor T.K. Oommen and I have been together in the same center for 30 years. So now, before I invite Professor T.K. Oommen to speak on the subject of exclusion and inclusion in the Northeast region, I call upon my colleague and former student, Professor Ajay Newman, to brief introduction of the speaker. Over to you, Ajay.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. I don't have to introduce Professor Oommen to many of the audience here, but for the younger generation, I would like to take just half a minute to introduce Sir. Although he has a long CV. Professor Oommen is a Padma Bhushan awardee and Professor Emeritus at Center for the Study of Social Systems, JNU, New Delhi. He was the first Indian to be the 12th president of the International Sociological Association from 1990 to 1994. He was also the former president of Indian Sociological Society from 1998 to 1999. Sir has held various positions at International Sociological Association during the period of 1986 to 1994. And he also have received numerous awards. He has received the prestigious B.K.R.V. Rao Prize in Sociology in the year 1981 from the Indian Council of Social Science Research, G.S. Pure Award in 1995 in Mumbai University, Swami Pranavananda Award in Sociology from UCC in 1997. Sir also received the Swedish Advanced Study in the Social Science in 1998, including the prestigious Philippos Mar Chrysostom Navati Award for Excellence in 2007. Sir was the chairman of the advisory committee, Gujarat Harmony Project, to explore the possibility of reconciliation between Hindus and Muslims after the communal riots in 2002. He was also the member of the Prime Minister's high-level committee to study the social, economic, and educational status of the Muslim community of India, popularly known as the Sacha Committee. Sir has written more than 26 books and numerous articles. His last book, which was released just a month ago by Asia Press, is South Asia Press, is From Bharat to India, an academic's journey. And I must say that Sir has produced hundreds of students who are scattered around the globe. And we are very fortunate to have him today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay, for this brief introduction. So now I invite Professor T.K. Oommen to come in and present, deliver the lecture on the topic Exclusion and Inclusion of the Northeastern Region. Over to you, Professor Oommen.
Friends, good morning to all of you. I'm really privileged and delighted that you chose me to deliver the first lecture of this new association. Association formation itself is a process of inclusion. And if any group of people in any context feels neglected, they would like to come together and articulate their position in the overall context. And I believe what is being done by the teachers of sociology in Northeast is one such effort. The present association is ample proof of that. Now, the terms used here, inclusion and exclusion, are familiar to almost everybody. But conceptions in social science are drawn from everyday life. It is not like conceptions in physics, for example. You know, I'm using physics because in the beginning, our forefathers in sociology looked at sociology as social physics. I hope you know that. It was referred to as social physics. Now, although the terms are drawn from everyday life, terms in sociology, I don't think they have the kind of precision that scientific terms usually have. So I will like to begin by suggesting some terminological or conceptual clarifications. These two terms came into being only in 1974. And the person who suggested or formulated these terms is not a social scientist of any description, but a man called René Lenoir. Lenoir, is a French administrator. He is the person who suggested these terms. And it has a context which is different from the sense in which we are using it in India or elsewhere. The notion of social inclusion first came into being in India through the idea of reservation. And that referred to a group. For example, the first two groups which were subjected to reservation in India were scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. You all know that. But in the case of France and other European countries, they were not referring to particular groups, but specific individuals who belong to certain categories. I'll come to that by and by. Now, this idea of reservation was a leap forward in the context of democracy. You know, democracy is not very old in the world. It is, I will not go into the history of that. It is rather recent. But in India, we are on the 75th year of democracy. And the two groups which were given the reservation, the scheduled caste, was 16% and the scheduled tribe 8%. And of course, the women deserve reservation, ought to be given, but we have not yet given reservation to women. We are still struggling with it. So the critical difference between the notions of inclusion and exclusion as adapted in India and as was prevalent in where it was originally introduced is very, very crucial. While they were referring to inclusion of specific individuals, irrespective of the background, the group background, in India, reservation was introduced and only available to two specific groups to begin with. Others are by arguing and demanding for it. But there was a fundamental flaw here when these two groups were introduced, SCs and STs. I have occasionally said that SCs and STs are used in India as if they are conceptual Siamese twins. You always say SCs and STs, but there is a fundamental distinction between them, and I need to tell you that. Although you are all learned sociologists, I am aware of that. The difficulty is these two groups, SCs and STs, are used interchangeably, but they are fundamentally different. Scheduled castes or SCs are part of the Hindu society, although they are placed very low in the Hindu society. Whereas, technically, sociologically speaking, scheduled tribes are outside the Hindu society. And this is a very crucial distinction. And yet, very, very learned sociologists, our founding fathers, have tried to use these terms interchangeably without much thought. In fact, the initial mistake or sin, the original sin, was committed by Indian administrators. I will not go into the details. But Indian sociologists have uncritically accepted the administrator's suggestion. For example, Gure has written, G.S. Gure, the president of the Indian Sociological Society, the founding president, the scheduled tribes, so-called, you know that. And this book was first published in 1932, and I think it has gone into 6 editions and is still in print. So, I'm sorry, it was first published in 1943, and it has gone into 6 editions. Scheduled Tribes, So-Called, 1943, published by Popular Press. Why is it that Professor Gure used the title Scheduled Tribes, So-Called? Because he thought that scheduled tribes are backward or were backward Hindus. In other words, this was a process of incorporating the scheduled tribes into the Hindu fold without their consent. And that is not social inclusion. That is social coercion, putting pressure on them. So, if you look at statistics, you will find, let me look at 1991 census, 8% of the Indian population are drawn from the 461 tribes. And of these, only 13% of the tribal population belong to what we call the Northeast. The major chunk group of scheduled tribes actually inhabit what is called Central India. Some anthropologists and sociologists refer to them as ancestor tribes because they are surrounded by the Hindu population. Now, but Northeast has only 13% of the total tribal population of India. And why is it that these two groups have been sought to be incorporated into the Hindu fold? Because, as Srinivas has referred to, they're being treated as vote banks. If you want to win over a group, it is sometimes helpful and useful to give them the impression that they are treated differently and favorably. In spite of this, now, in the 75th year of India's independence, that the Adivasi, one Adivasi person, became the first citizen of India. I'm referring to our president now. But what is important is even she belongs to one of the big tribal groups. It's not one of the small tribal groups. We have had 2 scheduled caste presidents, President Narayan and the one who left the position just now. So, even when a scheduled tribe woman was given the presidency, if I may say so, she belonged to a big tribal group. Because in democracy, number matters. Is there any possibility of the Parsis, a Parsi becoming an Indian president? I'll come to this a little later. So let me get back to the salience of concepts in understanding inclusion and exclusion. As I said earlier, the beginning of Indian history is widely believed to have begun, almost all historians, with what is referred to as Aryan Advent. Please underline the word Advent. That was not a conquest. That was not colonialism. The Muslim conquered India. The Western Christian colonized India. But the Aryans indulged in Advent. Is it not conquest? Is it not colonialism? And this was a process of legitimation, the very use of the term. So, the process of describing history, social processes, itself is very biased. The Aryan Advent occurred. What was the intent of using the term Advent? A, to say that they were not conquerors, or to communicate that they are not colonizers. And their culture, mainly religion and language, are indigenous. They are not foreign. Look at the contradiction or the paradox. The people of Northeast, now we are referring to not all Adivasis, but a substantial number is Adivasi. They have, why we have to talk about inclusion is the point I'm trying to make. And the people of Northeast embraced in large numbers, not entirely, Christianity. The religion of the Western colonizers' religion. And because of that, there is an element of, or there's a perception, there's a feeling that they do not belong to India. They are cultural outsiders. And that is a crux of the problem. The people of Northeast, particularly the tribals, and more so the Christians among them, feel that they are not treated as cultural insiders. Of course, they are citizens, there is no question. But this feeling is there, and that prompts people to think at the so-called mainland India or mainstream India, treating them or perceiving them as cultural outsiders. It is a paradox that all religions originated in India, Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, are considered as Indic religions. In fact, one group, the RSS, would consider that these religions of Indic origin are part of Hinduism. By saying that they're part of Hinduism, we, the so-called mainstream, is denying the specificity of those religions, although Indic. Think of Buddhism, for example. It is now a world religion. And in India, it is considered to be as a part of Hinduism. But the man who was instrumental for the propagation of Buddhism, namely Dr. Ambedkar, was a Hindu, born as a Hindu. He converted into Buddhism because he felt uncomfortable within Hinduism because of the low status assigned to him as untouchable. What I'm trying to suggest is the notion of inclusion and exclusion, if were merely measures of social democracy in the West, in India, it is much more deeper. It's very fundamental. And you try to understand the paradox. The Adivasis, meaning, and these days nobody wants to be used, nobody means the mainstream don't want to use the term Adivasi. It has very deep historical and cultural implication. Adivasi means the first settler. If Adivasis are the first settler, how about the Aryan Hindu? Obviously, he is or she is not the first settler. They came from outside. That means the claim that they are the original people of India, the caste Hindus, is contested. Now, look at the paradox, as I said. Adivasis were the first settlers. They are 100% indigenous. And now we are talking about inclusion of Adivasis, a segment of Adivasis of Northeast. Is it not a paradox? If we are the Adivasis, why should we ask for inclusion? We are there right from day one. So there is a very serious problem, even in the use of the term in social science, in sociology in particular. So we have to keep that in mind. It is not a very simple, superficial social welfare measure as in West Europe, the notion of inclusion and exclusion. The people who are so innate, original to this country, the Adivasis, feel excluded. And they are wanting to be included. What does it mean? And this fundamental problem, although initiated even in India through reservation, that is by our administrators, Indian sociologists and social anthropologists, supported that. We did not question the administrative understanding. The second source of stigmatization and exclusion in the case of Adivasis is language. I could go on about religion, but I will not. Your sociology, you all know that. You know, the linguistic reorganization of India was certainly an excellent measure which was taken in India to give importance to the mother tongue of the people. Again, this is a vast area. I've written about it. I will not bother you with that. Please read up if you want to know. But the State Reorganization Commission, SRC, was appointed with the explicit understanding that language is very important in society. You can live without religion as an atheist, but can you live without language? I'm not talking about a language, but any language. You have to communicate. Now, in SRCs, State Reorganization Commission, there is not a single social anthropologist as a member, a sociologist, or a linguist. This is all a group of administrators who really don't understand the importance of language in society, because it is too serious a matter to be left to IAS and IFS and all the rest. So language has a very critical function in society. Whatever is the language. Here, I must also emphasize that in India, universal education is implemented till the age of 14 in the language of the child. Are the people of Northeast, the children at the age of 14, are educated through their language, mother tongue, I mean. So it is so crucial, so critical that the right which is given to every citizen of India, other than the Adivasi, is denied to the Adivasi, the tribal people. So inclusion in India is far too serious a business, unlike elsewhere in the world. So the tribal languages are not in the 8th schedule, are not recognized. But there are so many tribal languages or Adivasi languages which are mother tongues of the child. What was the excuse of the State Reorganization Commission? I mean, it was membered by very outstanding people. I don't want to mention them. One is not only a mere administrator, but also an outstanding scholar, K.M. Panikkar, who was a historian, not our Panikkar in JNU, but he was a very old man, an ICS man. Now, the excuse was the Adivasi languages do not have their own script. In fact, it is a very ridiculous argument. Do you know some of the very outstanding languages in the world, French, Spanish, Portuguese, they all use Roman script, the same script used by English language. So you don't need to have an exclusive script in order to use a language for a certain purpose, like educating children. The Roman script could be pressed into service, but there are enthusiasts who want to say Roman script is a foreign script. Okay, you use Devanagari script. What is the problem in using Devanagari script with appropriate changes to communicate the Naga language? It is possible. But the real thing is, even not that, there are tribal mother tongues, like Santali, which has a mother tongue. Santali has, in fact, used in 3 different scripts: Devanagari, Santali, and Roman. So that only shows the deep prejudice against that which is usually referred to and dismissed as tribal.
Don't disturb me, okay? Yeah, I want to listen.
Pardon me? You want to communicate anything to me at this stage? I feel some disturbance in the middle. Okay.
Kindly comments till later. Carry on, Professor Oommen.
Carry on.
Yeah, I request your audience to kindly leave your comments till after the lecture is over. So
Yeah,
carry on.
if there is a provision for that, I'll
Yeah,
come.
they can put their questions in the chat box.
Yes.
You can see that later. Thank you.
Point I'm trying to emphasize is we sociologists also are impervious to these things which are so obvious. Why is it that we have not questioned the exclusion of tribal religion and tribal language, very fundamental cultural factors? So the general attitude of the elites in society, in the Indian situation, it is the so-called twice-born Hindus, particularly Brahmins. There are reasons, it's not their fault. The prejudice is a process of socialization, as we say. And to make that point, I would want to bring in another outstanding sociologist. His name is D.P. Mukherjee. You're all familiar with him. You all adore him. I also adore him. Why I picked him up? There's a reason. G.S. Gure was the first president of the Indian Sociological Conference, of which we are all familiar with and probably attached to. But D.P. Mukherjee was the first president of the Indian Sociological Conference. There were two earlier. They merged later, but again, that's a matter of history. I will not go into it. So, the first president of the Indian Sociological Conference, Professor D.P. Mukherjee, when he delivered the first presidential address, which is very famous, and almost all sociologists in India would refer to that in one context or other. He said, Indian sociologists should be familiar with Indian lore, L-O-R-E, both high and low. And he links our tradition with Sanskrit. You know, Sanskrit is the Deva Bhasha, the language of gods. But there are several problems here. First, only the twice-born Hindus and male Hindus, and no female, even if she is a Brahmin, is allowed to have access to Sanskrit. So, the access to what is called the Indian lore through Sanskrit is accessible only to upper caste male Hindu. And because of that, a large proportion of the Indian population will be eternally denied the possibility of access to Sanskrit and hence understanding Indian lore. If Indian lore is to be anchored to Sanskrit. And if so, a very fundamental and a vast segment of Indian population will be denied access to studies in sociology, social anthropology, or such other fields. But at a certain stage in independent India's history, education became accessible to the vast majority of Indians. Sanskrit ceased to be a live language. So today, ask the question, who learns Sanskrit? Where it is taught? So there is a disjunction between the progressive measure taken, namely making education compulsory to every child till the age of 14, and making Sanskrit the fulcrum of that education. Sanskrit, of course, now some effort is made to revive it, but in reality, it's a dead language. And if one were to revive Sanskrit, we must also revive their other languages. For example, Pali. Pali is the language in which the Buddhist texts are written. Or Tamil. Tamil is more ancient than both Sanskrit and Pali, or Persian. So there are several fundamental, deep, ancient languages in India. But Mukherjee is only mentioning Sanskrit, which shows a bias, a Hindu upper caste bias. So, if we really want to understand the Indian tradition, and this I'm referring to before the partition of the Indian subcontinent, there are at least 4 traditions: Sanskrit, Pali, Persian, and Tamil. But even these 4 traditions are what some anthropologists like Malcolm Merritt, etc., would call great traditions. But India is a conglomeration of not only great traditions, but also little traditions. What happens to the little traditions? And sociologists, particularly, who is dealing with everyday life, will have to be involved in the little traditions. So, no sociologist can ignore the numerous little traditions of India. B.P. Mukherjee made another observation. All our Shastras are sociological. All our Shastras are sociological. Here, our stands for upper caste Hindu. But you take out upper caste Hindu, the vast majority of Indians are non-upper caste. For example, the OBCs, the SCs, the STs, the Muslims, the Christians, all over. So when you say all our Shastras, our stands for upper caste Hindu, are sociological. But even that is not correct. Arthashastra may be sociological, but Dharma Shastra is not sociological. It is theological. It is prescriptive. All religions have their own prescriptive texts. It's nothing peculiar to a religion, here Hinduism. So, if you remember, in his debate with Gandhi, Ambedkar, in MK Gandhi, because there are too many Gandhis around, I'm talking about Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Ambedkar insisted that all Hindu scriptures that supported Hindu doctrine of creation, karma and rebirth, unless are disowned, he cannot call himself a Hindu. And he made this statement, I had no hope to be born as a non-Hindu. I was born as a Hindu, but I will not die as a Hindu. He changed to Hinduism. The point I am trying to make is, our people, I am referring to sociologists and social anthropologists, have been very much influenced by their religions. I'm not blaming anybody for that, but it happens. And they try to use their religion, upper caste, Sanskritic Hinduism, to mold sociology. And therefore, Indian society remains an unanalyzed entity. Many parts of India remain unanalyzed because of this orientation. So, the point at the moment I want to insist upon is that while in the West, exclusion and fostering inclusion was a very secular measure, a part of the welfare society. In the case of India, unless we go into our religious law, we cannot really decipher the meaning of inclusion and exclusion. And in the case of the tribal communities, the efforts have been made to absorb them into the Hindu society. A famous example is Sanskritization. If you start thinking about it, I did make a mention of that in my Srinivas Memorial lecture, which was published in Sociological Bulletin. And one of Srinivas's pet student, the late A.M. Shah, made a comment, adverse comment, which is longer than my lecture. I don't know whether you are familiar with this, you have read these things. So, nobody can deny that social transformation has not occurred in India, in independent India. And if you look very broadly, there are 4 trends which is happening in India, independent India. 1, from cumulative to dispersed dominance. If there was a time when the upper caste were rich, were at the top of the society in all senses of the term, that means cumulative dominance. Now we have people belonging to other groups who may not be ritually at the top of the world, but pretty rich, powerful, etc. So dispersed dominance as against cumulative dominance. Second, from hierarchy to equality. I'm not saying that there is so much of equality everywhere, but the possibility of equality exists. Earlier it was all hierarchy. Third, simultaneous demand for collective equality and identity. And it's here that our theme, our subject belongs. We, the deprived or the excluded, are demanding not individual equality, but group equality. And along with the group equality, we are also saying that we need to retain our identity. I'm not only an Indian citizen, but I am also another. I don't want to compromise my identity as a Naga in order to insist that I have every right to be, and I am, an Indian citizen. This is a very peculiar and difficult process, unlike in other parts of the world. And the movement from plural society to pluralism. I hope you know the distinction between the two. We are all professors. I feel ashamed, but let me tell you. Plural society is a term which was actually introduced by a man called J.S. Furnival. He was a man who wrote about colonial society. What was the idea of a plural society? A plural society is one where people of different cultures, the white man and the non-white or the black, coexisted, interacted in the market situation, that means in the economy, but avoided possible interaction in the social situation. To use his own term, they have transacted goods and services, but no transmission of blood. That means legitimate marriage. Of course, there was a lot of concubine and all kind of things existed. You know about it. But the white man, those days, marrying the black woman or vice versa, did not exist. So a plural society is one in which groups of people existed independent of one another. And we know the very common practice of caste endogamy. Caste endogamy existed all over in India. And then there was village exogamy and endogamy. I don't want to go into it. Again, you are sociologists, you are all well informed. Now, this is the background against which you have to consider your topic, exclusion and inclusion in Northeast. Northeast, as you know, the reference is to a region. It has no other reference. It is not entirely populated by one category, sociological category of people. As you know, there are 8 states, 4 are tribal, predominantly tribal or Adivasi. Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland. And 4 others, Assam, Manipur, Sikkim, and Tripura, are populated mainly by the peasantry. If so, prevailing exclusion and the processes involved in inclusion would vary. I have already said right in the beginning, the peasantry, the Hindu peasantry is a part of wider so-called Hindu civilization. There is nothing to include them. They are already included. Whereas the tribal people are excluded by most people in the world, vis-a-vis Hindu. So, in the tribal states, caste hierarchy is technically, officially absent. But in the states inhabited by peasantry, the caste hierarchy will be dominant. So, if you refer to Northeast as a region, as a whole, inclusion and exclusion would mean different things. Say in Assam on the one hand and Nagaland on the other. In Nagaland, our understanding is, I've not visited Nagaland, But my reading is that there is no caste system as we understand, let us say, in Assam. So we have to be, first of all, construct Northeast sociologically first, and then think in terms of the appropriate measures in inclusion and exclusion. So we have to be very careful, not driven by emotions. Even a casual walk around in the tribal areas in some of the Northeast states, for example, in Shillong, in the marketplace, I mean physical market, the presence of women is very impressive. You know, they are in the marketplace doing all kinds of transactions. But shift the scene of activity to a state assembly. You will rarely come across a woman political leader. So there is a serious deficit when it comes to power, political power. And it affects fundamentally women as they are excluded. On the other hand, when you think in terms of market transactions in the marketplace, you will find women are present, alive, and kicking. So, even within the Northeast, the distinction between the tribe or Adivasi and peasant, the Hindu peasantry, is very, very clear. And we have to think in terms of internal differences within Northeast if you really want to introduce the process of inclusion and exclusion. For purposes of social exclusion, they should be, Northeast itself will have to be differentiated. And even the universal global differentiation between the rural and the urban is not easily applicable in the Indian context. I don't know my time constraints. The chair can tell me how many more minutes I can go. It is 12:10. I don't know when I started.
Yes, that means we'll have only about 15 minutes for the discussion.
So, but how long will I have?
You can take a couple of minutes more and wind it up. Let us allow the audience to ask questions. I think in responding to them, you can come back, to your.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I want to insist that Northeast is not a sociological entity, although it is treated in India as an administrative entity. Nehru wanted to refer to that. In fact, he referred to as Northeast Frontier State, NEISA. That was the original term. Again, there is a very complex history behind it. I don't have the time. The chairman says I have only 2 minutes to go. But let me make 4 clarifications before I wind up. So there are 8 states and are 2 groups, the Adivasi group and the peasantry. So that distinction will have to be made in applying inclusion and exclusion. Northeast it is believed is largely populated by tribes converted into Christianity at the instance of Western missionaries. But this is wrong. Christianity came to Northeast during the Mughal period. In 1901, there were 33,783 Christians, which increased to 5.6 lakhs by 1951, the first census in independent India. After the British left, the Christians increased to fivefold, both in terms of increase in numbers and spread to new areas, for example, to Tripura and Arunachal Pradesh within Northeast. The expansion of Christianity was phenomenal in independent India. After the British left, there's a very fascinating article. I don't remember where exactly. I have it somewhere, written by Downs in the volume edited by Robinson and Clark, published, I think it is Christianity in India, published by Oxford University Press. The third misconception is that Northeast is a den of tribal secessionist movements inspired by Christian missionaries, supported by tribal anti-nationals. So independent India had only 6 secessionist movements. And the 3 biggest secessionist movements were outside the Northeast. One is, of course, that Dravidian movement in Tamil Nadu, which is anchored to Dravidian Hinduism. The second is Khalistan or Sikhistan in Punjab, anchored to Punjabi written in Gurumukhi script. Then Kashmir movement, which is attached both to Islamic religion and Urdu language. But both Naga and Mizo movements were national, in the sense Naga National Movement or Mizo National Front. They are not wanting to create new sovereign states. Then only you can talk in terms of anti-national. So, what I'm trying to tell you is, and since I don't have time, I have to wind it up. There is an enormous amount of prejudice against the Adivasis, the tribal people in India. And the tribal people are of 2 types. One is the insisted tribes of central India, the majority, and the frontier tribes of Northeast, some of whom have asserted about their identity, which is easily referred to as anti-national. And in that, there is a prejudice which existed and exists in India, which is understandable and common. But what is called sociologists and social anthropologists have not analyzed it. And I do hope the sociologists who are located in Northeast would try to decipher this deep prejudice which exists in India. And this is a kind of spillover of the upper caste Hindu prejudice and of the administrator. And it's our fault, the fault of the social scientists, particularly sociologists and social anthropologists, which has resulted in this rather deep prejudice. And it's our responsibility, our disciplinary task to see that it is done away with. So I have a little more to say. I will not say that because I'm a very disciplined speaker. The chair said that I have only 2 minutes. But let me tell you that I have written a book. This is the book, Social Inclusion in Independent India. And probably that might have inspired the secretary of this association to invite me to give this talk. I don't know. But I'll specifically say the third chapter in this book is Adivasis, Denial of Territorial Autonomy and Cultural Marginalization. And I believe that if sociologists and social anthropologists have done their job well, probably the present feeling and fact that there is enormous amount of social exclusion of Northeast in independent India would not have persisted. So it is a professional task. We have failed. We must rise to the occasion. And I appeal to the Northeast Sociological Association to do a thorough study of the reality on the ground. They're all there. None of this, what I have said, is invented. They are facts. And in order to educate the general citizens of India, it's a task of we people rise to the occasion. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Oommen, for a very lucid and touching on a wide range of issues, which I feel will be impossible for me to recapitulate in my comment. What I will do instead is I will leave it to the audience to ask some questions if they want to, and then I'll give my closing comment later on. But also I would like to request you, Professor Oommen, since we have run out of time, if you would be kind enough to give us about 10 minutes extra beyond 12:30, so that we do not do any injustice to the participants who may have a number of questions to ask you. Because the kind of issues that you have touched is really something which many of us are really engaged with. Revisiting the concept tribe, which is highly contentious. We have had so many meanings given, definitions given by scholars, which many of us find really difficult to go along with it. We have seen, like you have rightly said, the concept tribe has been defined as backward Hindus in the first place by G.S. Ghurye. And then later on we heard tribe is nothing else but a structural equivalent of Jati. And someone else said it is a non-sectarian Hindu. So the light of all these kind of definitions, you find it difficult, for students to really give them the kind of right, answer to the question. At the same time, I'm very happy, being a methodologist par excellence, you have challenged us really not to accept these terms and concepts blindly, but to unpack them to the basic constitutional units, to go into the ideology, as well as also go into the historicity of the definition of these concepts, because the location of who defines the concept really has an implication. So with this little bit of intervention, I would invite the audience for some questions. I think
some questions are posted here in the chat box, which you have a look. And 2-3 people have raised their hands, ma'am.
Shall first go to the chat box?
Yes, ma'am.
Because I requested them because I think we should first give the chance to them.
Yeah, and Professor Guru Swami also wants to ask.
All right.
Yes.
So one question has come from Jamatia. How does state negotiate with the citizenship, especially tribals or so-called ST, when development has become.
Can
How does state negotiate with the citizenship, especially of tribals or so-called ST, when development, has come about? I suppose the question is incomplete, but I think you can make out. So, how does a state negotiate with the citizenship of tribes or STs?
kinship?
Citizenship.
Ah,
How does the state negotiate with the citizenship demand, of communities who have been exposed to development in particular?
you see,
One question. Would you like to take them all together?
no, I can look at. Is there any related question on citizenship?
I only see one of that.
Is there any other?
Ma'am, Binita have also asked a question.
Is it on kinship?
No. About teaching sociology and.
No, that is an entirely. Is there anybody on citizenship?
There's
No.
only one question on citizenship.
Okay. Again, I am ashamed to say some of these things. I have written quite a bit on citizenship. And one, not necessarily relating to India, but the whole world. It is called Citizenship, Nationality, and Ethnicity. Reconciling Competing Identities. This book is published by Polity Press, Cambridge. Unfortunately, because of the oppressive cost, it is not easily available, but I understand because they didn't take permission from me. The Jaipur publisher, what's his name? Rawat, has brought out an Indian edition of this book. Without my knowledge, they did not take my permission. But it's available for you. So please, I cannot explain these things in few minutes. It's a whole book edited by, under the general editorship of a man called Anthony Giddings. Again, you should know the name. And it is published. I have tried to, I'll very, very briefly say that the trouble about citizenship is it is conceived within the context of inextricable relationship between nation and state. Whenever there is a nation, the idea is to have their own state. But the Indian situation was quite different. We had 400 odd, what is it called? Provincial states. I myself was born not in India, but a provincial state called Travancore, which became a part of Kerala, one of the linguistic states of India. And in the West, for Napoleon's pronouncement was, for each nation its own state. And if I were to give you the example of the French state republic, only 18% of the people spoke French language when the French Republic was constituted. Only 3% of Italians spoke Italian language when the state of Italy was constituted. So there was enormous amount of what I call, this is a term which I have coined, which none of you would be familiar with. If familiar with, will not be used. It is not Sanskritization. Cultural side. Culturocide is a systematic destruction of the cultures of people. All states, nation states, which wanted to have homogenization of the cultures of the people who were drawn into that state, were subjected to culturocide. So there is enormous amount to be studied about citizenship, nationality, and ethnicity in the Indian context. If you go back into the history of Indian sociology, we were only worried about whether the joint family is giving way to nuclear family. But what has happened to women, to children? We were not bothered. We were only debating whether caste is moving to class. How does it matter? What I'm trying to suggest to you is Indian society is a mine as far as sociologists and social anthropologists are concerned. So we need to look at these things critically. And in so doing, we will be questioning our own forefathers. I mean, forefathers professionally, sociologically. Please do that. And then you will get the answer. This cannot really be discussed in a meeting like this, because we have hundreds of nations in India. Maybe I may be arrested for this tomorrow. Because what is a nation? Nation is a set of people who cohabit a territory and who can communicate with one another. If you cannot communicate, you are not a nation. Therefore, the people of Tamil Nadu or Bengal or wherever it is constitute a nation. They are occupying a territory. They are also having a common language. But that does not mean that they should have a sovereign state. And there is this is a disease of the West. For each nation, its own state. No, state means sovereign state. Citizenship is something for which you are entitled. I'll give you a small example and stop. On August 14th, 1947, there lived a man called, let us call him Mr. Oommen or whatever, in Dhaka. He was a British subject on August 14th, 1947. Then, on August 15th, 1947, India became independent. And he became a Pakistani citizen. And later, when the bifurcation took place between Pakistan and Bangladesh, I don't remember the date, but whatever, 1970s, one fine morning, he became a Bangladeshi citizen. So what happened to him? He was a British subject. Then, of course, a Pakistani citizen, and then a Bangladeshi citizen. But he still is a Bengali-speaking Muslim. Am I right?
So we still have many other questions to be attended to.
What I'm trying to say is, he was still a Bengali-speaking Muslim. The two attributes we normally use, language, here Bengali, and religion, became irrelevant as his citizenship changed. I hope you can draw your own conclusion. Yes, the next question.
Yeah, there are quite a few questions. One question is from Benita Behera. She wants to know, how do we resolve the gap between teaching and the reality within which we're situated? And if I understand the question correctly, she asked whether we need to go through some orientation to sensitize us to the issues of what we teach in the classroom. That is one question.
You see, I would like to request you, you are all teachers like me, professors, sociologists, learned people. If you are going far afield in terms of formulating your questions, even after hours, we will not conclude. I am always requesting you to confine to the theme of the talk. There are hundreds of things we can discuss, but that is not possible.
So point taken, sir. Okay, point taken. The other question has to do with identity. This is a question which asks that since many tribes have been converted to Christianity, so how do we ensure that they're able to preserve their indigenous culture?
Indigenous
culture, their culture and tradition. The implication here is that once you're converted to Christianity, you shed off your culture and tradition and imbibe new ones. So how do we ensure that when you're converted to Christianity, you're able to retain, the traditional culture, symbols, practices that's been a part of the community in the context of tribals?
There is a very widespread misunderstanding that religion, any religion, Christianity being one, is similar everywhere. It is not. Religions are different depending upon where it exists. In India, I made a study of Christian clergy long ago. It is published by Sage, and I have tried to show that there are 140 Christian religious denominations in India. And many Christians don't know about it. And the biggest is the Catholic denomination. But there are countries in which Catholics are not in existence. In other words, the simple general point is any attempt to look at a phenomenon, here religion, through the glass of uniformity is wrong. Religions vary from continent, within continent, from different states or enclaves. So we must accept that religion is also a plural phenomenon. I'm now talking about a single religion. And that plurality will have to be accepted. So it is not that the Christian practices are the same everywhere. They are enormously different. So accept plurality or pluralism as a phenomenon, just like democracy. Is democracy the same everywhere? The practices of democracy vary vastly across. American democracy is not the same as British democracy. And both these differ from Indian democracy. And they are influenced by the social practices, the society. And that is why society is so important. These days I am subscribing to a newspaper called Indian Express. And yesterday's newspaper or the day before, I found they have asked an economist and a political scientist and a musician to write their views about India on attaining 75 years. Is India only an economy and a polity? Fundamentally, it is a society or a conglomeration of societies. So they have never asked a sociologist to write. Why? Because we are perceived as incapable of writing about our own society. I hope I'm making my point. It is very, very saddening that we, the sociologists and social anthropologists, are not taken seriously by even the journalists who are running newspapers. So the same would apply here. Indian Christianity itself is different because its sources are different. I mean, if you talk to any any missionary from any background, they will tell you the enormous difference between, if I may say so, Naga Christianity and Kerala Christianity. So don't be under the impression that there is some single thing, homogeneous thing called a religion. Is it not true that Dravidian Hinduism is quite different from Aryan Hinduism? Why this trouble between, clash between North and South in India based on the two Hinduisms, Aryan and Dravidian. So try to understand diversity, plurality, and that's the way to go about it. Yes.
So there's one more question.
Yes.
This has come from Devashish Rai. So he question relates to the increasing demand for ST status by communities and whether acquiring ST status will help them achieve their goal. And also, is there any limit to this?
You see, I don't think there is I don't know what is the basis of the formulation of this question, increasing demand for SC status.
ST status, ST.
ST.
Yes.
Well, I don't know, against available statistics does not show that. There is both detribalization and some retribalization. Because there's a whole saying that many people in India want the cake and eat it. See, they don't want to accept a lower social status, which is usually attributed to scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and OBCs. They want to be reckoned as social groups having higher status, higher than what they have. But at the same time, they want to have the benefits of the benefits given to the groups which occupy lower status. For example, scheduled castes or scheduled tribe. It's a paradox. And therefore, there are people who say, abolish caste identity and make income as a basis. There may be some point there. So, this is an interesting question, but needs much more probing before it is formulated and put forward.
Okay. So I think with this, perhaps there are only observations, not really questions that are asked. So if we are now 12:39, maybe we can have 5 minutes more, if that's okay with you, Professor Oommen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I was told that some participants had raised their hands. I did not notice. So if they're still there, you can address the question directly to Professor Oommen. So I welcome those who had raised their hands to address the question directly to the speaker.
Ma'am?
Yeah.
Vika Darlo, can you just ask a straight question?
Okay. Dr. Dika Darlong? Dr. Dika Darlong, are you there?
Professor Guru Swami also wants to raise, but he just left. Professor Guru Swami, sir?
Dr. Darlong has come. I know. I can see him there.
Yeah.
But he's got up.
Darlong has gone.
Darlong has not unmuted.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Benson,
Yes.
Okay,
Answer is
Vincent is not asking questions.
yes.
Darlong, do you have a question?
I'm just
Yes, I'm so sorry. We were okay. Sir, in one of your publications, this is very recent, in your publication, Social Inclusion and Independent India, you said that culture and language is a part of, for Northeastern especially, is a part of inclusion aspect. So do you think in this inclusion aspect, repealing AFSPA and implementation of inner line permit is part of inclusion as well for Northeastern state?
what is inclusion? I didn't follow your question.
Can you reframe it, please?
Yeah, means what I'm trying to say is that when you said about in terms of Northeast in your publication, social inclusion in independent India, that culture and language is a very important factors for inclusion of tribals in Northeast. So besides this culture and language, what I'm trying to say is that implementation of inner line permit and a repealing of AFSPA, this is Armed Forces Act, which is there in some of the states, which was implemented from 1958. So this repealing of AFSPA and implementation of ILP, do you think is this part of inclusion as well, this demand?
You see, again, I said we have to be conceptually clear. In India, there were 3 approaches about the tribal people were concerned. One, they are a part of Hindu community, absorb them. The process of absorbing tribals into the Hindudom or Hindu community. Integration, that was one approach. The other is isolationism. There was a man called Werner Elwin, I hope you know. He was a British missionary, lived in India, and he wanted to maintain the integrity of the tribal cultures. Each tribe had its own specificity, its own religion or religious practices and language. And this was called isolationist approach. And incidentally, the first Prime Minister of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, was in unison with this idea, because the Nehru's idea was supportive of this proposal made by this man, what's the name I said? Werner Elwin. But there was a third approach, which was by D.N. Majumdar, who was professor of anthropology at Lucknow. He said selective acculturation and selective rejection. He, for example, said, look at the Hindu custom of child marriage, which is certainly not acceptable. But look at the Adivasis. They don't have child marriage. They have a growing up process. There is their own version of what is called dating. Some tribals have dormitories where the youth met, socialized, and decided whom to marry and when. So this is something which is very interesting. Majumdar argued that some of the tribal customs are very modern as we talk about the West, and the Hindus should accept and adopt it. Whereas the customs like child marriage, which the Hindus are practicing, should be rejected. So I have written about it somewhere, I don't remember exactly, the selective approach and selective rejection between the Hindus and the Adivasis is a better approach rather than the isolationist approach, which would keep the tribals isolated from the so-called mainstream. So one has to be very open-minded in these things. It is a matter of luck or fortune or misfortune that each one of us was born into one particular type of system, culture. It's not our fault. So we must try to overcome that, our own limitations, and try to understand others' cultures and practices, and try to accept and adopt the more rational ones. So child marriage is prohibited in India. But even now, a lot of child marriage is taking place. Why? Because of the customs. And that custom was without any prohibition, without any legislation. The Adivasis have rejected long ago. They don't have child marriages. They have marriages by mutual consent of the adults. So this is a kind of attitude that we must develop. And this is not necessarily always to be brought about by state legislations, but our own customs. Our means the community customs, and try to understand which is a more rational, more acceptable custom, and accept that. So even the tribal communities are so vastly different in their customs and practices, but it is time that we debate, discuss, and adopt the right one. And I have used an example of child marriage. Okay? You are not convinced.
Thank you very much, sir. I think we should end on this note. You had raised a very pertinent point. Talking about the what really constitutes tribe and what the various approaches to the study of tribes. As I said earlier, a very contentious category even till today. There is no agreement among everybody what really constitutes tribe, and also in terms of the policies that needs to be adopted by the government. You talk about the policy of absorption, that tribes are nothing else but part of Hindu society, Hindu civilization. The second one is of isolation, the very Elwin model of solving the tribal problem. And the third is integration, which is the most liberal and progressive, which I think many of us really agree, with that, But looking at some of the publications which have been brought out in recent times, by highly distinguished sociologists, we see that some of the publications, some of the statements, not full public statements, made by sociologists with respect to tribe, it raises, serious, questions in the mind, and also raises, a large degree of concern, at least in me. Because I noticed, that the policy of integration, which we all subscribe to, has somehow suffered, serious dilution. As I said earlier, G.S. Ghore defined tribes as backward Hindus. And then later on, we hear, like my teachers in Delhi school, describe tribe as a structural equivalent of Jati. And then further, another teacher described it as a non-sectarian Hindus, So non-sectarian Hindus are part of Hinduism, but they don't have a sect, don't have a cult of their own. I think this boils down to what you said earlier. The way in which tribes have been denied the religion. Tribal religion is seen as nothing else as animism, worship of spirits. Not equivalent to the high religions of the Hindus, Islam, or Christianity, for that matter. And then the way in which tribal languages have been excluded in Indian Constitution, except for Santali, as you had said, as well as also the Bodo language more recently, and Maithalon, which have made it to the 8th schedule of the Constitution. Many of the tribal communities in the Northeast, my community in Meghalaya in particular, have been struggling and negotiating, with the central government, with the Home Ministry, to get the Khasi language, which has a very vast and rich literature, included in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. Nothing has happened so far. So the process of inclusion and exclusion that we talk about here, and it operates, in a very unique manner in the case of Northeast India. While it may operate in a certain way with respect to the majority communities, with respect to the minority groups, it doesn't really operate in that sense. So, and I really like what you had said earlier, that we need to look at inclusion from the lens of secularism, which very often we fail to do. Secularism has somehow taken a back seat, in policies, and I do feel that as sociologists, as scholars, we have a very great responsibility to ensure that, that the kind of writings that we bring out, to really reflect the sensibilities and nuances, aspirations of the population, of the people whom they study, the emic and ethic approach. Not look at the point of view of what you think is best or what you think it should be or what ought to be, but look at the thing of what it really is, and also take into consideration the aims, aspirations, sensitivities, and nuances and complexities of the situation. So this, with respect to this, I really feel that your lecture is quite appropriate for sociologists and social anthropologists. I'm still a little bit, sad that we did not have much time to address the third question of looking at the construction of the Northeast, of the Northeast, because Northeast also, it's a highly contested, the concept, so which really needs to be looked, very carefully in this. A lot of work had been done by historians, but sociologists and anthropologists, I think we have not to look at it, very minutely. So I feel that you have provided us this afternoon with an agenda, for NEISA to now focus our attention, apart from internal processes and structures within the Northeast, but also look at the meaning of the term and concept itself, because that has implication, on the way in which we understand the region. So I would really like to thank you for taking out the time, and the effort to come and present this first lecture, at NEISA. We are in an advanced stage, and we look up to you, sir, as always, to provide us, the insights, to look at the problem which we are all engaged in, trying to grapple to understand and comprehend, so we can ensure a better future, better understanding for that region. So with this, I would like to invite Professor Mohanty to give his word of thanks. And thank you to the audience for listening patiently, all of you, and for the constructive comments and suggestions that you have given. Thank you.
Honorable Chairperson, Professor Tipul, esteemed resource person, Professor T.K. Oommen, the guru of 4 to 5 generation gurus, Vice President, Professor Chandan, Secretary, Professor Ajay, respected core committee members, members of NEISA, participants from far and near. Proposing vote of thanks is the last item of our first academic event after the recent formation of NEISA. Professor Oommen said in 1986 World Congress of Sociology while proposing the vote of thanks, I quote, "Almost all important events are rare. His rarity is structured around 2 components. Where it is organized, Northeast, and who adorns the podium and who participate. Sir, our rarity is attributed to Professors Oommen's kind consent, genuine, diligent availability to deliver this first lecture amidst his busy schedule and also some negative imputations by some. We are really blessed to listen to such a brilliant, context-specific, erudite lecture. I found the same strength, same weight, same vigor, same vitalities in his speech as I was listening to you in your class on Durkheim and Pareto in 1982. A huge thank you, sir, on behalf of NEISA and on my personal behalf and in this noble historic beginning of our association NEISA. In the same 1986 speech, where I joined as a volunteer under Parthanath Mukherjee, Professor, you said, I quote, "The role of a leader in nurturing associations and organizing events is of vital importance," unquote. Yes, sir. The hard work by our secretary, Professor Ajay, continuous guidance from President and ardent advisors, Vice President, Joint Secretaries, Professor Amarjit, core committee members, senior faculties of Northeast India, general body members are really the people who deserve our special thanks for being so supportive and so cooperative in this. I also shall fail in my duty if I do not thank those for whom this was lecture was organized. I thank all the participants, and probably we had 182 logged in, but around 1,000 in the smart classrooms in several universities and colleges of Northeast India, the country. I thank all of them from the core of my heart and also on behalf of NEISA. May God bless us to continue to organize these activities under the banner of NEISA at times ahead. I hope this event today shall pass on to the pages of history of NEISA as a great gala historic event. I thank one and all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mohanty.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Mohanty. Thank you, sir. Oommen, sir. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. Thanks everyone who are present here and making it a huge success. Professor Mohanty.
Thank you. Congratulations,
Thank you, ma'am.
NEISA.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.